INTC 6543 International Church Planting, Unit 3.2 Lecture, Harvest Field Research Introduction. Another initial step that we should undertake is to try to understand the people we want to reach with the gospel. This is done mostly through harvest field research. A major component of harvest field research is profiling, or gathering demographic and other information on the people group. A people group profile is a useful tool when launching efforts to stimulate a church planting movement and multiple reproduction of churches. Geography, history, and culture influence evangelism and missions. We must understand important characteristics of our people group if we want to maximize our ministry opportunities. A people group profile helps us gain an understanding of how to contextualize the presentation of the gospel and move toward the planting of indigenous contextualized churches that have the ability to evangelize their own people. An integral part of the people group profile is an accurate description of the people group's worldview. To gather this harvest field research, we must dig deeper than demographics and statistics. We must strive to understand the focused people group's worldview if we hope to communicate the gospel effectively. Worldview is what helps to shape the culture of a people, and culture, in turn, exercises a profound influence on human behavior. Culture is not genetically inherited. Culture is acquired after birth through learning by association with other members of society. This process is called enculturation. Learning comes by living with other members of that culture through education, deliberated initiation, deliberated imitation, observation, and unconscious absorption. Every member of society goes through a process of enculturation in which a person acquires both the good and bad characteristics of that society. This acquired learning and its related behavior are changeable. While understanding the people group's worldview provides for more effective communication of the gospel, it also helps plant indigenous churches. Remember that the overall objective is to facilitate the rapid multiplication of indigenous churches planted among the people group, so that the entire people group can be evangelized. If the church planters do not understand the worldview of the people they hope to reach with the good news of Jesus Christ, the preaching of the gospel will appear foreign to the people. One of the harshest criticisms of mission work by adherents of other religions is that the gospel comes wrapped in Western culture. Consequently, many non-Christian people believe that to become Christian is to become westernized. What a great disservice we have done to the kingdom of God by wrapping the gospel message in Western clothes. We must be students of the worldviews of our people groups. There are significant differences between the worldview of tribals, popular Hindus, Orthodox Hindus, folk Muslims, Orthodox Muslims, Buddhists, Jains, Sikhs, etc. A people group profile helps us know how to contextualize the presentation of the gospel and move toward the planting of indigenous churches that have the ability to evangelize their own people. In 1999, I had the opportunity to lead a group of Christians to conduct profiling interviews among a people group in South Asia. This particular people group was called the Ahom people, and one segment of the Ahom people had converted to Hinduism, while the rest continued to practice their traditional religion of animism. The segment of this people group that had converted to Hinduism was unique in that they were idolist Hindus. They simply referred to their places of worship as the house of the Lord, or Namgar. They worshipped one god, Vishnu. They had one holy book, the Bhagavad Gita. And when the people came together to worship usually was conducted through song and drama, singing, reciting, and reenacting the stories of the Bhagavad Gita. I traveled with two young Indian evangelists to one of the areas where this people group lives. One of these young men was a believer from the people group whom we were profiling. The three of us visited several communities and villages, and on one warm afternoon, after riding in a small bus and on the back of a truck for several hours, we arrived in a Hindu village where the people group resides. As we walked into the village, we passed a local Hindu worship place. The walls and roof were constructed of thatch and bamboo, and the floor was dirt. The drum that was used to call the people to the house of the Lord was neatly situated near the door. No idols were present, only the drum and the stand on which the Bhagavad Gita would be placed where the people came when the people came to worship. All of a sudden I noticed a second building erected within 20 meters of the Hindu Namgar, or House of the Lord. This building was open, and so the three of us decided to look inside. What we discovered was something interesting, to say the least. Inside this nice building with wooden walls were wooden benches placed neatly in rows, and at the front of the benches was a beautiful wooden pulpit. To the right of the pulpit was a keyboard, and to the left was a nice wooden cabinet where songbooks and Bibles were placed. We were inside a village church building. That we were inside a church building didn't surprise me. What surprised me was the vast difference between the church building and the local Hindu House of the Lord, or Namgar. Before becoming believers, these people gathered in their worship place, sat on the floor and sang songs without any instruments or with traditional instruments. Now those who had become followers of Christ were instructed to sit on benches and sing songs played on an electronic keyboard. After looking around the church building and recording in my mind the differences I saw, the two young Indian evangelists and I set out to find the pastor or the missionary. We asked several villages, and soon we were directed to this man's house. The three of us were able to meet with the Christian worker and his family. The Christian man was from a neighboring tribe and had come to this people group as a cross-cultural worker. During the course of our conversation, the young Indian evangelist who was from this specific people group asked the cross-cultural worker, "When do you gather together as believers?" The response was immediate. "Of course we meet on Sundays." Then the young Indian evangelist asked, "When you gather together, are there any problems?" "Yes," came the reply. "The Hindus will often come and throw stones on the metal roof, making so much noise that it is difficult for us to worship." As we traveled back to our guest house late that afternoon, the two young Indian evangelists and I discussed what we had experienced in the village. Why did the worker build a church building like that in the village? "It is not surprising that the new believers in he faced persecution," said one of the young men. "It became obvious to us that the worker in that village had not given much attention to the existing culture of the villagers. He had not understood their worldview. Is it a requirement that Christians sit on benches or in pews to worship Christ? What message is sent when the local worship place is made of bamboo and thatch while the church building is made of wood and sheet metal? Is it a requirement that a keyboard accompany worship instead of local instruments? Is it a requirement that they sing strange songs to strange music in a strange tonal system instead of using their own local languages, local songs?" The three of us discussed these issues for several days following our village visit. We should try to understand the worldviews of the people groups we want to reach with the gospel so that the churches that we plant among them will be contextualized. We are commissioned to bring the gospel to the people. We are not commissioned to bring a new culture to them. We are not commissioned to bring our culture to them. Yet that is exactly what has happened for hundreds of years in mission efforts. Often missionaries are insensitive to the new culture in which they have entered. They tend to make judgments about the new culture, thinking that since these people are non-believers, their culture must be evil. Thus, many Christian missionaries are viewed as cultural invaders rather than communicators of the good news. As we profile our people groups, we are looking for things that can help us contextualize the message and plant indigenous churches. We are looking for bridges that will help communicate the message. In the aforementioned example, would it be appropriate for the church planter to allow the people to worship Jesus while sitting on the floor with the stories of the Bible into a song format and by acting out Bible stories through drama? Of course it would. Would the church be more properly contextualized if this were the case? Of course it would. Is it surprising that the Hindus in that village saw the church as something foreign, an invasion of their culture? No, it is not surprising. The following will help us understand why we need to identify the worldviews of our people groups and understand the culture and the process for developing those worldviews. We will see the kinds of questions that need to be asked and answered in order to build effective worldviews or effective profile of our people group. The people group profile will enable us and others working among our people groups to pray more intelligently, to communicate the gospel more effectively, and to plant indigenous churches that will multiply among the people group and beyond. A people group profile is never finished. Every encounter we have should expand our understanding of our people group. The list of questions provided will help us begin to profile our people group. We're going to build our profile. I'm going to use Hesselgrave's 7 dimensions of culture. And these 7 dimensions of culture will help us get a grip on the worldview and the culture of the people in such a way that we can contextualize the gospel message and contextualize the church. The first dimension is worldview. The question here is, what are the assumptions about life and God? The second is the cognitive processes. These are the ways by which people in society process the information they receive. The question is being asked, how do they process information? Linguistic forms are the ways by which people communicate and express themselves with one another. The primary question asked is, how do they communicate to express themselves? Behavioral patterns highlight a people group's customs, traditions, habits, actions, and lifestyle. The primary question being asked is, what do people in this society actually do? Social structures encompass the relationships within the immediate family, the extended family, the community at large, as well as with authority figures and people from different communities. The primary question being asked is, with whom and how do the people interact? Media influences show how information is shared in the society as well as the technologies used. The primary question being asked is, how do they receive information? And finally, the motivational resources define values such as what is good and evil, right and wrong, etc. And the primary question being asked is, how do the people in this society decide what is right? Worldview. What are their basic assumptions about life and God? Religious beliefs are usually the lens through which the members of any culture perceive and interpret reality. In many societies, it is primarily the religious beliefs that determine the people's worldview. Because the assumptions that form the basis for a worldview are passed down from generation to generation, most often through the religious structures and systems, they generally are taken for granted. The more adapted a person is to his worldview, the less likely he will be to recognize that he has one. The major areas of religious belief that need to be understood are the people's views on God, man, sin, salvation, life after death, creation, the deities they worship, sacred sites and rituals, rites of passage, spiritual leaders and authorities, their sacred writings, and their attitudes towards other religions. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group's worldview include, what is the group's predominant religious system? What is their view about God and the position of God? What are the characteristics of God within their religion? What are their beliefs about creation, humankind, life, the source of life, sickness, death, life after death, and eternity? What are their basic beliefs about good and evil? How do they view wrong, sin, guilt, and salvation? And where does the religion's power and authority rest? What is the source of that power and authority? What are the religious leaders and how are they chosen? Under what condition and what by rules are they chosen? How are religious leaders recognized and sanctioned? What are the religion's primary books or documents? What are the major religious rites and events? Do people believe in miracles and magic? Are they superstitious? Do they wear amulets to ward off evil? Do they enter into magical rites? What is the relationship between the seen world and the unseen world? What do spirits and deceased ancestors play in the religion? Is there interaction between the living and spirits and between the living and the dead? How does an individual relate to the religion? Is personal choice respected? How does the religion view other religions? How did the people regard securing converts or adherents? How do they react to deviance from their predominant religion? How does religion involve society? How do religion and society relate to one another? What position does religion have within that society? How does religion involve family? And how are women viewed and treated within the religious and societal context? There may be other issues about religion that you think need to be answered. So the first dimension of understanding the culture is their worldview. And worldview is found primarily in the religious beliefs. And we're trying to answer the question, What are their basic assumptions about life and about God? The second category is cognitive processes. How do they process information? Cognitive process is composed of three parts: conceptual, intuitional, and concrete relational. We must know how people process information so that we can intentionally present information in the realm that is most important to them. The four spiritual laws may be universal, but if a society does not place great emphasis on Western logic, the presentation will not be meaningful. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group's cognitive processes are: when new information is presented, how do people determine what is true and helpful from what they would consider false and harmful? Is primary emphasis given to conceptual logic, or is their thinking more concrete relational or intuitional? Every culture uses all three, but the order may vary according to culture. Some cultures predominantly process information first through the conceptual component, then through the relational component, and finally through the intuitional component. Other cultures process information first concrete relationally, then intuitionally, and lastly conceptually. Still other cultures first process information through concrete relation, then the conceptual, and finally the intuitional. So the cognitive processes is how do they process information. Hessel Grave's third category or third dimension of culture is the linguistic forms. How do they communicate to express themselves? Studying linguistic forms involves more than just learning to understand and speak a language. It means trying to grasp how language is used to communicate truth and acclimate members of that society. Language is basic to communication. All people have a right to hear the gospel in their heart language. Until a person has heard the gospel in his heart language, he has not truly heard it. Communication that is not in the heart language lacks effectiveness and diminishes credibility. Assumptions are made that people will be able to comprehend a gospel presentation in the trade language since they use that language in public. Consequently, in some places in the world, local Christians are immature and shallow because they never truly understood the message missionaries attempted to communicate. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group's linguistic forms include: what is the primary language spoken by the people? That is, what language do they typically speak in the home? Are written scriptures available in the language? Are the scriptures available in any form, such as Jesus film, radio broadcast, or MP players? What is the literacy rate for men? What is the literacy rate for women? Are there special religious terms used in the heart language? For example, what word or words do they use for God? What meaning does this convey to the people? Do people speak a market or trade language? If so, what is it? Are scriptures available in that language? The fourth dimension of culture is understood by Hessel Grave is the behavioral patterns, answering the question, what do people in this society actually do? We observe what people do and try to understand why they do it. Behavioral patterns offer greater understanding of the people's values than books do. Books say what people should think is important, while behavior shows us what they believe to be important. Regarding behavioral patterns, several areas should be examined. These include art forms, birth rituals, celebrations, clothing, death rituals, energy, festivals, food, healthcare, judicial system, marriage customs, puberty, recreation, and shelter. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group's behavioral patterns include: what do people do when there is a new birth in the family or community? Is there a special ceremony for when a boy or girl reaches puberty? If so, what do they do? What do they do when there is a marriage? What do they do when there is a death? What does this communicate about their belief in the afterlife? Describe any significant religious rituals that are performed. What is the meaning behind these rituals? What special religious festivals do people celebrate? What is the purpose of each festival? Do they have any specific taboos? For example, not like not eating pork. And why do they have these taboos? Describe the people's typical worship practices. What kinds of clothes do they wear? What kinds of food do they eat or avoid eating? What do they do when someone is sick in the family or community? What does this reflect about their worldview? What kind of housing do they have? What are the major forms of recreation for men and for women and for youth? Do the people have any special kinds of music? What instruments do they typically use? Do they have any special kinds of art forms? The fifth category is social structures. With whom and how do they interact? How society views an individual and the interrelationships of people will influence communication. People are unaware of these influences because they are born into them. For example, in many American cultures, people shake hands when meeting. Hindus will place their palms together, lift them to their face, and say namaste. In Japan, people trade business cards before engaging in conversation so that they will know how to address one another appropriately. Social structures provide an organizational pattern for relationships within societies. The vast array of human relationships can be bewildering. Therefore, societies establish broad categories to help its members know how to relate to one another. Consequently, people do not need to work out a personal relationship with every stranger they meet. Every person has a place in society, and members are provided with a mental map that helps them understand where people fit into that society. For each new social structure that we wish to enter, we must have a sponsor or a person of peace. This sponsor is a person within the group who will introduce us and lend us his credibility. In some societies, this may be a village chief or another respected elder. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group social structures include: do the people practice monogamy or polygamy? Who can they marry? Who can they not marry? Are the families patriarchal or matriarchal? Describe the heads of households. What are the authority lines in the family? Who makes decisions and how are they made? What are the relationships between family members? Identify the kinship lines and patterns of the extended family. What are the rules and expectations regarding receiving permission? How are the differences or grievances settled within families? How do children choose their life vocations and their roles in the community? How are families changing in this society? How is society organized? How do families relate to other families? How is one's place in the community decided? Is there a caste system or another form of social structure in place? How do members of the society relate to outsiders? How are their leaders chosen? And by what authority do these leaders operate in their society? What are the basic values in society that give it cohesiveness? Are there any other people groups with whom this people group traditionally has had conflict? If so, who? Describe the nature of the conflict and the reason behind it. The sixth category is media influences. How did the people receive information? Each medium of media has its own personality that influences the message being communicated. A particular medium can distort a desired message. For example, a tribal group's response to a showing of the Jesus film may be a reaction to the magic that makes people appear on a screen. In addition, keeping in mind that the gospel should be communicated through reproducible methods, if the gospel is communicated via methods and people that the local people cannot repeat, it may send the message that only missionaries or visiting church planters can share the gospel. Some questions that need to be answered relating to the people group's media influences include: what media are available in homes? What media are available in the community at large? Which media do the people typically use to gain information about the outside world? Are the people literate? What languages and dialects do they people speak and read? Are they a storytelling society? What is the average educational level of men and women? What percentage of homes have radios? Are the radios shortwave or another kind? How often do they listen to the radio? What percentage of homes have television? What percentage of homes have computers? And how do people access these computers and other technology? Finally, the seventh dimension of culture, as presented by Hesselgrave, is the motivational resources. How did the people in this society decide what is right? The decision-making process varies greatly from culture to culture. Some cultures emphasize that any decision is better than no decision, while others say that no decision is better than a wrong one. Some questions that need to be included and answered relating to the people group's motivational resources include: Who makes decisions in the family? Who makes decisions in the community at large? Who handles the family finances? Do families allow family members freedom to change their religion? Does the community allow entire families the freedom to change their religion? What will typically happen if someone changes his religion? When disputes arise in the community, who handles them? Are the government leaders the true authority in the community? If not, why not? What is the relationship between religion and politics in the community? What types of peer pressure are evident in the society? So we can see from this lecture that it is important that we understand the worldview and culture of the people that we're trying to reach in order that we can contextualize the gospel message and plant indigenous contextualized churches that are able to be reproduced by the local people throughout their own people group and beyond. And we can build our people group profile around Hessel Grave's 7 dimensions of culture: worldview, cognitive processes, linguistic forms, behavioral patterns, social structures, media influences, and motivational resources.